friends in the APEC region. Hi, welcome everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to our weekly FPF Privacy Chat, although we haven't been as diligent in our weekly schedule. Part of it is because we're all traveling. I was in the French Bordeaux region last week where it was lovely and cool, although the winemakers are a little worried that the grapes are about 2 weeks behind their ripening schedule. But for those of us visiting, it was quite lovely. I'm joined by Maria Badillo, our lead on Latin America. Maria is based usually in New York, where it is as, I think, hot and sweaty and uncomfortable as it is in the Washington, D.C. area. But I'm also joined by Professor Pablo Palazzi, and Pablo is in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where, of course, it is winterish. So hopefully he's enjoying some cooler, breezier, sweltering weather. But excited to have Maria and Pablo with me to discuss this recent report. It's on our website. It's linked in the LinkedIn comments. Regulatory strategies and priorities for data protection authorities in Latin America 2024 and beyond. And Maria and Momina Imram, one of our team with Matheson and input from our experts in Latin America, Pablo and others, have really taken a look at some of the really busy activity in this critical region. It may indeed be that 2024 is the year of data protection and AI regulation in Latin America, as we see the older jurisdictions that have had legislation looking at updating and modernizing, and obviously many new, more recent jurisdictions filling out their laws, building out their strategies and their capacity. So we're going to take a deeper look into this report. And what the team did is separate in a couple of thematic directions. They looked at regulatory priorities. They looked at enforcement priorities. They looked at advocacy and public participation, and they looked at strengthening institutional capabilities. So I'll hand over to Maria to sort of walk through a bit some of the common themes as we look at each of these areas, and Pablo, working on the ground, will add additional comment and detail. Maria, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Jules, and thank you, Pablo, for joining us. And thank you, everyone who is joining us right now. I hope this is going to be helpful, and hopefully will provide a big overview of all the things that are happening in Latin America right now. So just to provide you a little bit of context on why we decided to do this report at this time right now, is the fact that we see that, well, we know that most governments in Latin America, they already recognize privacy and personal data protection in their constitution and their legal frameworks. And sometimes they recognize these two fundamental rights as separate fundamental rights at a constitutional level. So in accordance with that, some of these countries have enacted data protection laws that some of them date from the 90s that were heavily inspired by Directive 95. And in that regard, they also created regulatory authorities to ensure compliance with this data protection framework. So, for example, we have Argentina, Uruguay, Mexico, Peru, and Colombia that have all data protection authorities that are actively monitoring and regulating on the data protection field in their respective countries. And now, as you mentioned, we know that we are on like the era of data protection authorities, and how they work is becoming increasingly important, and even more in the context of AI and other emerging technologies. So we really wanted to take a look at the Latin American region to see how data protection authorities are envisioning their work for not only 2024, but also for coming years, and to basically try to identify any commonalities or trends in the region that could help advance collaboration or policymaking in general. And so we looked at, essentially, we looked at 6 jurisdictions. Our criteria was fairly simple. First, we try to focus on those jurisdictions that have an established data protection authority or an agency with supervisory powers in the data protection space. So this is the case of Chile, for instance, where we do not have a specific data protection authority, but we have that the CERNAC, which is their consumer watchdog, has supervisory authorities in the data protection field. And the second condition is to have that agency issuing a planning document or a sort of public statement where they basically announce their goals, their strategies, their priority areas for the following years. So in that sense, we selected Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Panama, Uruguay. And we also decided to include the Ibero-American Network of Data Protection Authorities, which is basically a network, a forum that brings together data protection authorities in the Latin American region to discuss and enable cooperation among these authorities. So I will try to quickly walk us through the findings, the most relevant findings that we have in this report. But I would definitely recommend to take a deeper dive into the report because we have a table where we basically identify all the common topics by jurisdiction, and we see where they overlap the most. So for instance, updating data protection laws and also protecting data subject rights is one of the two topics where we see most of the overlaps with the selected countries. And we also have an annex where we basically did a summary of all these strategic or planning documents that we could find by jurisdiction. So if you really want to learn what these planning documents say without having to go to the original resource and reading these sometimes quite large documents, we got you with that annex. So moving on to the findings. So we basically divided the results into 4 categories, including those that relate to regulatory priorities, enforcement, advocacy and public participation, and capacity building or strengthening their institutional capabilities. So first, with regulatory priorities, here we found that a common trend, as I mentioned, is that some of the countries, not all, but some of them, such as Argentina, Chile, and Colombia, they are in a very serious process of updating their data protection laws. Some of these countries, they already have a very advanced legislative proposal in their respective legislatures. And this, of course, is a result or is work that depends ultimately on the legislative and political will, right? But we find that even on the strategic documents of DPAs, such as Argentina and Mexico, they include it as an objective to aid Congress on drafting legislation and even secondary regulations where necessary. So here, a very relevant example, and perhaps Pablo, you could add a little bit more of context here, is that Argentina's DPA, they were actually pretty active in drafting the proposal that is currently being analyzed in Congress. And different to Argentina, Mexico has not been through the same route, but they have been pretty vocal on their willingness to support Congress if they decide to update the laws that date back to 2010.
That's correct. Yeah, can I jump in? Yeah. So Argentina, as well as Chile, who has a very old law, are trying to update their laws, and of course they are following GDPR. So the process is taking a lot of time because there are a lot of back and forth with the government, who doesn't want to increase the spending of public budget. So it's a delicate balance between complying with the whole GDPR principles and not spending a lot. I mean, I heard one public official from a DPA in Latin America saying that in Latin America we tend to copy the European model with Latin American budgets. So that's a problem because they are difficult to enforce. But Argentina is trying to enact a new law, as well as Chile. what they are doing also in Latin American countries is to approve little guidance, a little regulations, secondary regulations, where they will implement some part of the GDPR. So you have Chile, is not Chile, but Argentina approving with Uruguay a data privacy impact assessment guidance, even though we don't have a privacy impact assessment in our law or the law of Uruguay, and you see little things advancing with different regulatory regulations.
Pablo, let me ask you this question. We're now seeing, major decisions by the European Court of Justice, or even by the EDPB and different data protection authorities, that are really developing some of the analysis of the GDPR in ways that I argue are different or unexpected. Much of GDPR was already national data protection law in many of the European countries. And I always understood, for instance, that most of the major media, for instance, used a pay or tracking kind of model. But now we see decisions, at least targeted at Meta, but presumably logically, tightening some of the understanding of the GDPR, very specific views of consent that are, again, a bit more strict, perhaps, than has often been the case. How are these, updated interpretations of the text, being influential or not? We have lots of text that was influenced by the GDPR, but the GDPR is really being developed by the court and DPAs in ways, that go build on, change, enhance, nuance what the text has. Are these decisions being, looked at as influential in the local interpretation, or do the local regulators, the local experts say, look, yes, it says consent, but here's how we interpret consent, or here's how we interpret legitimate interest?
Complex question, a complex answer. I mean, first, there are so many ECJ cases now going out about data protection that is difficult even for us specialists to follow them all and be aware of all them. And it's much easier for a Latin American country to copy statute or a model law than just to follow each case and each interpretation. And when the model is copied into Latin America, you see cases like Brazil, where they put more legal basis than the one that are available in GDPR. So you have different interpretations because the model is not identical. I mean, they do some twists when it's implemented, like the case of Brazil. So I expect to find difference with GDPR. Also, Ecuador, for example, they started doing a whole GDPR model, and then they start justifying that departure on the fact that they need to localize GDPR into Ecuadorian law. So we'll see differences.
Thanks. Maria, back to you.
Yeah, very interesting. And we also, taking a little bit from what Pablo was mentioning, another thing that we found was that most of these data protection authorities are very focused on issuing more secondary regulations that will have a binding effect, meaning that they will basically supplement or complement what the data protection law indicates, but also in the form of more soft law mechanisms, in the form of guidance. So three areas where we find a lot of overlap is with enacting more guidance or regulation in regard to processing children's data, providing more guidance for data protection officers, and artificial intelligence. So for instance, for processing children's data, we have that Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, they will be working or have already been working this year, but they will continue to do so in coming years. For instance, Argentina recently issued a set of recommendations for processing children's data, and Brazil is on the process of doing so through a binding regulation, and they actually have a public consultation open. They have right now. They also have conducted preliminary studies to, for instance, assess the definition of legitimate interest, which is a concept that we found under the LGPD, where basically refers to the idea that when you're processing children's data, you need to abide by this principle of doing it in the best interest of the child. And there has been like a lot of controversy and fairly like a lot of academic debate on what specifically refers to the best interest of the child and what the interpretation of the ANPD should be. So Brazil is in the process of doing that, which is very impactful, of course. Also on data protection officers, we also have these two same countries committing to provide more guidance and even training for data protection officers in both public and private sectors. And this is an area where also the Ibero-American network is seeking to provide support through more guidance and training for other data protection authorities that may not have a lot of resources to do this type of training or issuing guidance in this regard.
Can I ask a question about the DPO role in particular for either Pablo or Maria? How much focus is there in law or in guidance in the DPO being independent? We've seen increased guidance from, again, the Europeans on the DPO really being very independent. They can't have any data processing responsibilities. They have to report in a certain level. They have to have certain, job protections. In Israel, there's discussion of creating the role of a DPO, but a lot of debate over whether companies, can have a senior counsel, and that's really the privacy lead, or whether it's really this external figure whose focus is really supporting, the data protection authority and, this measure of independence. That's how much has independence in the US, when we've had focus on mandating privacy roles, it's been more, hey, someone needs to be accountable at a senior level and like on the hook to make sure there is, good privacy structure, less sort of that, oh, it's an independent watchdog, type of role. So how has Latin America handled this this role?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't have a DPO provision in Argentina or in Peru. The Chile draft law will have a DPO mandatory in certain companies of certain sizes. And probably the most advanced country with experience is Uruguay, which Uruguay is doing little amendments to the law for the last 5 years, and they include a DPO provision in their law. And they also enacted a guidance where they require that to be independent, but still we don't know what that means, to be learned. So he has to know about data privacy, and they check that. And in fact, they told me that they have rejected some registration of DPOs for not having adequate qualifications. And they have this registry, and they have created this community where they gather every month, and they discuss issues and give guidance to work together with the DPO and the DPA. So in Uruguay, I think it's working very well, because probably it's a small country, so it's easier to do that.
But my understanding, and Pablo, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I saw it, that I saw this on the legislative proposal from Colombia and perhaps Argentina as well, where the DPO is actually assigned by the controller. So I'm not sure how much independency will that get, and like basically being like this intermediary role between the data controller with the data protection authority.
Yes, but I don't know how the word independent is in the statute, in the proposal bills, but I don't know how it will work with labor laws in Argentina or in Uruguay or in Brazil, where labor laws are very strong. We don't have employment at will in Latin America. So basically you have protections for the worker, and the DPO is another worker, and how that works, because at certain point you have the right to fire someone, not for data protection related issues, but for other issues. So we still don't know how that will work. I'm aware of ECJ cases that Jules mentioned, like there are 3 or 4 cases already talking about that, but we don't have experience still in Latin America with DPOs and labor law.
Interesting. Let's move maybe to enforcement priorities at this point. What did we learn? It seems like the strategy documents that many of the authorities publish, not all of them really identify that they've got very specific areas that are their priorities. What did we learn from your look at enforcement priorities?
Yeah, that's correct. So when looking at these planning documents, most of them, they do not say, right, like we're going to focus enforcement on this particular area. Perhaps the most interesting case in this context is Brazil, because Brazil is actually the only authority that publishes like a map of priorities where they will focus or ramp up their sanctioning and investigatory powers. And in this map of priorities, we found that Brazil, for instance, will focus a lot of its enforcement priorities on monitoring the exercise respect of data subject rights in the financial and telecommunications sector. And the ANPD has also been like very open that they plan to do this in collaboration with the central bank and even with the telecommunications regulator when conducting like inspection visits. Another area of focus for Brazil will be monitoring, again, the processing of children and adolescents' data in digital platforms, and also monitoring the use of AI for facial recognition systems. This will be particularly focused on video surveillance and the use of face recognition systems. Very recently, the research coordination within the ANPD has released like a preliminary study on this issue. So we will expect a lot more activity in this field. And also, the ANPD has indicated they will monitor more heavily the processing operations of data aggregators and data scrapers to ensure they are compliant with the LGBT. Now, related to the enforcement priorities, we also found the Ibero-American network plans to support the cooperation in this field by basically trying to identify real cases that affect multiple individuals in multiple of these jurisdictions that are members of the network, and to facilitate collaboration between these countries. So notably here, and perhaps Pablo, if you want to comment on this as well, we know that the Ibero-American Network has recently created 2 working groups, which are basically directed to investigate and monitor the operations of ChatGPT and also WorldCoin that we know has been expanding steadily through the Latin American region. And this, of course, adds to recent statements from several authorities in the region saying that they will be very vigilant to the operations of WorldCoin. So that is what we could basically have like a common trend or commonality in the region as for enforcement.
Yeah, I like to reinforce what Maria was saying about collaboration. In the case of Brazil, there's a strong collaboration between different agencies. So a few years ago, we have the WhatsApp / Facebook case, was the change of the privacy policy of these 2 apps and the sharing of data between them. And Brazil started an injunction, and it was based on a collaboration between the antitrust agency, the telecom agency, and the data protection agency, and they issued a press release together. It was the first time in Latin America that 3 agencies from different functions get together and support and help the DPA. And the WhatsApp case was the first regional case that was investigated also in Colombia and Argentina. The second case that Maria mentioned is OpenAI, ChatGPT. This started with Spain, who holds the secretariat of the Ibero-American network, and pushed the Latin American countries to do something regionally. So they created a questionnaire in the subgroup of enforcement, where they sent the same questionnaire from different agencies in Costa Rica, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Argentina, Uruguay, Mexico, and Brazil. And currently, a company has already answered those questions, and they are deciding what to do the next step. But by working together, the DPAs of Latin America are becoming bigger in the sense that they share information and they help together. And
Pablo,
also, yeah, one more thing
Pablo,
about the WorldCoin case. There's also the WorldCoin case has prompted a litigation in Chile because you know that what the WorldCoin case is that you scan your biometrics and they give you some coins, crypto coins, so some kids do it without telling that they were minors, and there was some litigation in Chile saying that they were collecting data from kids, and the company deleted the data, and the case became moot. So there's no decision there.
WorldCoin, for those listening, is the company founded by Sam Altman, famously the founder of OpenAI, ChatGPT. So, in addition to scanning eyes and blockchain and all that sort of thing, gets even particular global interest because of the high-profile nature of the founder. Recently hired a well-known chief privacy officer, former Twitter CPO Damian Kiernan, who hopefully will help put some good additional privacy oversight structure in place. But I did want to mention that Pablo, in addition to being a senior fellow at FPF, as a practitioner and partner doing data protection work at the law firm of Ascende and Brea. Please be impressed by my efforts to do the appropriate Italian pronunciation, and the director on his academic side of the Center for Technology and Society at the University of San Andre. But what I wanted to ask Pablo, in the US and Europe, a big portion of the regulatory focus is on ad tech and cookies and tracking and so forth. We didn't really mention that as a major enforcement priority. Is there a little less drama kind of around chasing the ad tech issues in any of the Latin American countries? It feels like that's been like a center priority for a lot of the enforcement at the FTC and so forth. With so many cases, was the data going from this site to third-party ad tech and that sort of thing? What's been your experience?
It's
on the
not
ground?
a priority. I mean, in practice, we tend to answer those questions because they come up in part of the practice. But having, for example, a cookie policy separated from the privacy policy is considered a best practice in Latin America. It's not mandatory. We don't have any privacy directive in Latin America. So basically, we deal with normal privacy principles, and in the end, it's relegated to a second issue and a best practice. It's not, and ad tech also haven't been so much complicated. I haven't seen it as a priority. I mean, there was one spam case in Argentina and one in Peru 10 years ago when spam was an issue, or 15 years ago. And then.
And how much are we seeing cookie banners showing up everywhere? One of the very sad things that we have now in the US is we were laughing at the European cookie banners, saying like, is it really useful to anybody? Is it so annoying? I was just in the Bordeaux region in France, and it was lovely, except every time I opened up a website to look for any directions or something, I was like, cookie banner, cookie banner, cookie banner. I'm like, oh my God. But in the US, we're seeing it as well, not because of the same consent issues, but mostly because of concerns about these wiretapping lawsuits. And the hope is that by getting consent, then maybe you won't be subject to these wiretapping suits, or the Washington Health Act and other opt-in consents for health data. So now, again, unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of these cookie banners, which are, obviously not the most consumer-friendly solution to this issue. Do we see lots of cookie banners in Latin America to annoy consumers?
Maria, I don't know what you think, but I haven't seen any. And when I see one, it's because the company is a European company and it's forced by the headquarters to put it globally, and they have it because upstairs say you need to do this, but it's not the case for local companies or US companies operating here in Latin America.
Yeah, I agree totally. It's more like on the global companies. Whenever you access their websites, that's when you normally see them.
Let's move to the other two sections in the couple of minutes we have left. Advocacy and public participation. What did we find in that regard?
Yeah, so being conscious of time, I'll try to go very quickly with this too. So we know that in Latin America, still like increasing data protection culture and awareness remains like a challenge. So in this sense, it remains one of the recurring priorities for most of the DPAs in the region. And so some of the DPAs are very committed to continue to increase awareness through several activities that basically include involving more citizens into public participation for decision-making processes, but also through the organization of social media activities, social media campaigns, with a national impact, and also to provide training to staff, to civil society organizations, to industry. And another recurring priority is to continue capacity building. This is basically because most DPAs in the region, they continue to struggle with limited resources, and this is perhaps something that will never go away. So they're trying to find ways in which they can basically do more with a limited budget. And some DPAs, we have to take into consideration that some DPAs in Latin America, they even have a dual mandate. So some of the authorities, for instance, in Mexico and Argentina, they were created first as access to information agencies, and then they were assigned with the mandate to protect privacy and data protection. So they basically have like two big tasks on their plate with very limited resources. So one of the things that DPAs are focusing on is to basically continue to train their staff and to also update their systems, like technological and management systems, in order to be more efficient. And another very important aspect to achieve this is that most of the data protection authorities, and perhaps this is something that I would like to close with, are very, very open to collaborating with other sectoral agencies, like nationally, but also on an international level to have more cooperation with other agencies. So this is where the work and the activities from the Ibero-American Network becomes truly relevant to really advance privacy in Latin America.
We've had some very good collaboration with the Brazilian authority on privacy enhancing technologies. They've got some real experts and interest there in advancing how Brazil supports and considers pets. So certainly seen that. Pablo, we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, just wanted to add to what Maria said, that civil society participates in the Ibero-American Network institutionally. They have a specific participation, so they have, and that creates certain pressure over the DPAs to act. They've been lobbying a lot for certain cases, like the work on case, etc. So they pressure the DPAs to act, and also they have some right to litigate class actions in some countries like Argentina, for example. So a good example is the face matching recognition system in the subway of the city of Buenos Aires that was stopped by an injunction of an NGO that claimed that there were some errors, which was true. So the face matching was working well, but the data that was fed to the face matching was mistaken, and they detained wrongfully or arrested people who, as they were seek by justice, and they were not, they were innocent. So because of that, they win a litigation where they said that face matching in the subway of City of Buenos Aires is legal, but they have to do first an impact assessment on the privacy of citizens, and after that they will restart it.
We'll close with that. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Pablo, for joining me. Thank you, Maria and team, for this fabulous report. Folks, take a look at fpf.org. You'll find it posted there. It's posted here in the LinkedIn comments. Really a valuable read. I don't think we've translated it into Spanish or Portuguese, but you know what? The new AI tools, one thing they do pretty well is translation. So go translate it to whatever language you would like if you'd like to read it in a different flavor. And thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.